Okay, hello everybody. Good afternoon or evening from wherever you are joining us today. Welcome. This is our April edition of our 2023 book series, Teachings, Conversations in Consciousness. And we are so excited today to bring you Dr. Richard Gold and Anne-Marie Cushing will be joining us to interview Dr. Gold on his book, and his topic of somatic approaches for immune enhancement. And before we dive in, I just wanted to let you know, my name is Nicole Ryle, and I'm the Director of Development and Public Programs at CIHS Enlighten. The Enlighten sector of CIHS is our public programs where we offer continuing education, certificate programs, and public enrichment like the program here today. So we'd like to welcome you wholeheartedly to today's presentation. And these presentations are made possible by your donation. So you can see on my screen, there's a really easy text number that you can pop on at any point during our presentation to make a donation so we can continue to bring you programming like the one today: mind, body, spirit, consciousness, education, and public enrichment for your personal growth. So I now will turn it over to Dr. Thomas Brophy, President of CIHS. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, thank you so much, Nicole. So yes, welcome to this very special live event from California Institute for Human Science, part of our special 2023 book series. And I'm just delighted to be able to introduce today's presenter, who is very much connected with CIHS's mission and the philosophy of CIHS founder, Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama. And today's topic is especially wonderful. It's in our Conversations in Consciousness series topic, Somatic Approaches for Immune Enhancement. Dr. Richard Gold has a really extraordinary pioneering background. I want to emphasize the pioneering. It's great that I can mention he's a bachelor's graduate of Oberlin College because I feel close to that. I'm a graduate of the Colorado College, which is sort of a sister institution. We're both members of something called the Accredited Colleges of the Midwest, and it's really wonderful. So he's one of the first graduates, I believe, from the New England School of Acupuncture in 1978. And that's, sort of when that's the pioneering of licensed acupuncture practice in the United States, basically. He's devoted his professional career to the study, practice, and researching and teaching in the field of traditional East Asian medicines. Dr. Gold was one of the 4 founders of Pacific College of Oriental Medicine, which is now called Pacific College of Health Sciences. And he served on the board there for many, many years. Dr. Gold is a published author in the fields of acupuncture, somatics, and applied neuroscience and sound. And he's established a production company, Metta Mindfulness Music. Dr. Gold met the founder of CIHS, Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama, back in the 1980s. And he is now a distinguished trustee of CIHS. We're very lucky to have him in that role. He will be interrogated by Anne-Marie Cushing. No, it'll be a conversation with Anne-Marie Cushing, who is a visionary architect, educator, and advocate for health reform. She's an advisor to national and international health organizations, providing leadership and strategic envisioning of health reform. She served as co-chair of the executive committee board of the famous and extraordinary New York Open Center. Most fortunately for us at CIHS, Anne-Marie is also a trustee of CIHS. So this is a conversation between 2 distinguished trustees of CIHS. And now I'll turn it back over to them.
Thank you so very much, Thomas, for that kind introduction. And Nicole, thank you so much for organizing this. Welcome to our visitors that are here online with us. My talk will be in a few parts. The first part will be a personal story about how I came to learn about the material that's in this book. The second part will touch on some science, some physiology to help create the framework, I think, for further understanding and hopefully more self-awareness. And the last part will be really what we can do somatically to enhance our immune system. So much of the knowledge or the information we get even from practitioners and alternative practitioners in the government have nothing to do with somatics. It's either diet, exercise. Well, exercise is sort of somatic. The diet, exercise, and immunizations. So this is going to take a different tack, and hopefully it'll be self-empowering. So the book that I'm discussing is Setai Shiatsu, lymphatic Shiatsu, and the additional techniques of cupping and gua sha. The background to this is that in Christmas time of 1985, I set off on a 4-month study and personal growth tour to Asia. I'd already been practicing acupuncture since 1978 and been involved as an educator, but I really felt the deep personal need to deepen myself intellectually, spiritually, as a doctor, and have some life experience. I'd already been to do a hospital internship in Shanghai in 1980, but I really felt a deep need to deepen my understanding. I had an introduction to a well-known doctor in Hong Kong, Dr. C.K. Butt, by a dear colleague of mine here in the States. From the first day I entered Dr. Butt's clinic, he said, "I need you to meet my mentor, one of my mentors, Dr. Lam, who was a physicist and also a Qigong master." Dr. Lam, as with Dr. Butt and myself, we just all connected beautifully. It was really an extraordinarily wonderful experience. Now, Dr. Lam, he knew that a part of my agenda was to go to Osaka, Japan, because I had one of the only things I actually had on my calendar besides my flight dates was a meeting with Dr. Hagiwara, who was the founder of the Green Foods Corporation, who created the seminal product, the Green Magma, which is one of the first easy to use and delicious green foods. He'd been working on that since the 70s. So I had that meeting. So Dr. Lam knew that I was going to Osaka. He informed me that in Osaka, there was someone he really wanted me to meet. And that is the man who became my mentor, my Shiatsu mentor, Kiyoshi Kato. Now, Dr. Lam never had met Kiyoshi Kato, but the story gets a little complicated. Please follow along. Dr. Lam's sister was living in Brazil with her Japanese husband when she was diagnosed with cancer. After treatment in Brazil, they considered her terminal. And Dr. Lam's sister's husband knew about Kiyoshi Kato and the work that he was doing in Osaka, which I'll get into in a little more depth. And so he brought his wife back to Japan and became a resident at the treatment center, this Kenko Saisei Kaikan treatment centers of Kiyoshi Kato, my sensei. She recovered from terminal cancer. This so impressed Dr. Lam that he and Kiyoshi Kato developed a correspondence. And from that correspondence, I was sent as an emissary to deliver a personal message to Kiyoshi Kato of gratitude. And also, without me even knowing it, I was encouraged or being invited to become a student of Kiyoshi Kato. What's true and what's somewhat extraordinary about this adventure for me is it's very difficult for non-Japanese speaking people to study in Japan. There literally, even to this day, there aren't programs in Shiatsu in Japan that you can just sign up to and just go to Japan. It doesn't work that way. It's easy to do in China. It's easy to do for Ayurvedic in India. But Japan, for whatever cultural reasons, that's really not a viable option. But from the first time I called the Kenko Saisei Kaikan training centers and they heard me speak in English, the phone was handed to a man named Kawako Osoksa. This won't be on the final, by the way, all these names. And Kawako is Finnish. He speaks fluent Japanese and Russian, and he was a senior student of Kiyoshi Kato and his translator. Kawako said, "Let's meet for lunch and discuss your training program, your training schedule." I said, "Training schedule?" And I was still in this way. I'm like a rolling stone. If the direction is this way, I'm willing to try. I was filled with enthusiasm, and also I was a searcher and seeking. So then I was brought into the training center. Now the Kenko Saisei Kaikon Kaikon training centers were residential treatment centers for terminally ill patients. Every person that was a patient there had been sent home to die. So this was the sickest of the sick. And Kiyoshi Kato had developed a therapeutic program to bring people back to health, and bring back people to life. I don't have any data or statistics to support his program, but I do know that when they had open houses weekly, when potential patients would come in and meet existing patients or people who had gone through the program in previous years, I met people that had miraculous stories, that had come back to life when they'd been on the door of death. The core of Kiyoshi Kato's program was Seitai Shiatsu, or whole body Shiatsu, which on further examination from a Western physiologic point of view, I recognized was really a lymphatic style of Shiatsu. It combines pressure points of Tsubo, Kiyatsu type of pressure points, but also rubbing, Ama techniques. So it's actually a unique blend of traditional Shiatsu techniques. So this is my teacher, Kiyoshi Kato. This is a younger version of me in 1986. And this is Kaoko's cute little daughter, Kimi. To make the story even a little more personal too, is Kaoko and his wife, Kayo, invited me to stay in their small one bedroom, one room apartment during my stay there. In traditional Japanese way, we rolled out a tatami and a futon in the little living room, and that's where I stayed. And we had just an amazingly wonderful time. It was a beautiful thing. And Kiyoshi Kato welcomed me as a student. He knew I was serious. He was willing to tease me in front of the patients, which I found was very personable. And when I said to him, "Sensei, what do I owe you for this honor of being your student?" He told me, "All I want from you is that you'll go back to America and teach what I'm teaching you." And then faithfully, I did that for many years. I'm continuing to do that with our talk today. I honored him further with my book. And it was and continues to be a wonderful life experience. Now, Kiyoshi Kato was influenced intellectually, and part of his program was based on the teachings of Kikyo Chisama, who was the intellectual inspiration. He was an honored scientist in Japan, and he had a unique theory of blood development. It's called the intestinal hematopoietic theory of blood formation. This was not against or in place of the blood cells forming in the marrow of the bones, but it honored the fact that it really cohesive to traditional Chinese medical model, where we say that the energy of the earth, of spleen and stomach, transforms food and fluid into blood and energy. This was before, Dr. Chisama was before stem cells were particularly discovered. I think he discovered stem cells and didn't know it and didn't have a language to express it. But he felt that this was the basis. We need to remember that red blood cells don't have a nucleus. And so they could become anything in the body that they adhere to, in a sense. They take on the organs, they take on the bone, they take on the structures of the body. So this was just an inspirational teaching for me. Chisama had 9 or 10 volumes of his thought. He was like a Rudolf Steiner of Japan. And one book is translated into English. And that's the one where the blood theory is described in detail. So that's it. Now we're going to go more into some scientific approach. Blood and lymph in Western physiology, these are described as 2 distinct systems. But what's true is they are really one open system that integrates, that the lymph is in the blood and then it filters out. It becomes lymph as it filters out of the circulating arterial blood. So to really see them as distinct, they have times when they're distinct in the body, but they're really one great system. Interestingly, in traditional Chinese medicine, a separate lymph system isn't described, is not identified. Fluids are described, but something identified as lymph is not. And so it was understood from the Chinese point of view that blood and lymph really were one great system. In the Chinese medical literature, this dates from the Ming Dynasty, a very high period of Chinese culture, ending in 1644 AD. They say that wherever there is form or substance in the human body, all depend on blood. And if there's a lack of blood or stagnation of blood, this is where disease will be observed. Because blood is what carries oxygen to each and every cell. And lymph takes nutrition to the cells and then receives the metabolic byproduct of cellular activity and carries it away. It carries the toxins away from the cells. So this is very essential, that the foundation of postnatal existence is dependent on blood. Now, I'd like to consider the lymph as what we call a silent protector, because unless we're fighting infection and we have swollen lymph glands, or we've been sick and we're coughing up copious amounts of mucus, we don't even know the lymph is happening. But what's true, it's constant, constantly vigilant, constantly there identifying pathogens. And what the lymph does is it steers the pathogens into the lymph nodes. And it's in the lymph nodes that the immune response occurs. We can say this is white blood cells, but we know more about white blood cells, that there's macrophages and neutrophils and leukocytes and T cells. They trap these pathogens in the lymph glands, and this is where the immune activity occurs. And the swelling we get in our lymph glands when we're fighting infection and disease is the metabolic activity, the dynamic metabolic activity that's going on. And this is literally physiologic warfare. And lymph, the fighter cells in our body have to be able to identify pathogens, and then they quickly adapt to the shape of the pathogen, and then they destroy the cell walls, and they hopefully always overcome the pathogen. As we know, it can be a long-term struggle, it can be a repeating struggle, but it's the essential struggle of how we stay healthy. Because we need to, I think, also recognize that we are constantly under bombardment by pathogenic factors. Even cancer cells in our body are free-floating often. But as long as our lymph system is highly attuned and in good health and not stagnant, this is an important thing. We don't have blood stagnation, lymph stagnation. Our immune system protects us. There are major components of the lymph system. Lymphatic vessels, which are how the lymph moves through the body. The nodes, the major nodes are going to be in the armpit area, in the groin, and in the abdomen and chest. There's something called Peyer's patches, which are not that well known, and these are actually in the small intestine. And this is where the absorption of foods is very important to help support the immune system. The thymus, which lies under our sternum, the spleen, and bone marrow. These are the major components. Interesting, the thymus, which is where T cells are primarily produced, when radiation first came on board in the 50s, and doctors had noticed in autopsies that elderly people, thymuses had shrunk. They thought that was something they should do. And so they were radiating thymuses of young people at that time, not knowing that they were really limiting an important part of our immunity. T cells themselves didn't really get in the headlines until AIDS came along in the 80s. And that was one of the important markers that was determined. Everybody wanted to know what your T cell count is at that time. So what's lymph doing? It collects interstitial fluids. These are the fluids between each cell. Critically, it removes waste products from cellular metabolism. Again, the mitochondria in every cell is like a little factory, and dependent on the quality of the nutrition, the availability of oxygen, and the dynamics of the mitochondria themselves, there's always going to be waste product. It's like the exhaust coming out of a combustion engine, not an electric engine, a combustion engine. And it's essential that these toxins, these metabolic ash, metabolic byproducts, get taken away from the cells and get excreted from the body through urine, feces, and sweat primarily, and also in exhaling with respiration. Lymph actually helps carry nutrition to the cells. Again, vital immune functions. In fact, immunity is taking place in the lymph, and it helps return proteins to the bloodstream. Now, there's no lymphatic pump in the body. Even though lymph stagnation and blood stagnation are critical pathogenic factors, causes of creating the environment where disease can occur, there's nothing that's really pushing the lymph particularly. And this is where we see it's really one great system, because it's secondarily to arterial blood pressure. So when our left ventricle pumps and shoots blood out of the heart and through the aorta, that sets up a dynamic that goes through the whole body and percolates through, creating vibrations that create movement. So how our heart works is very important in this. Smooth muscle contraction. Every time we exercise, and this is one of the byproducts of exercise is actually it's moving lymph, not just building muscle and cardiac and lung capacity. When we do deep breathing, we push our diaphragm down into our abdomen and massage our internal organs. This helps move lymph. When we invert our body in the gravitational field, this is one of the benefits of some of the yogic postures. But I really encourage something called slant boards or inversions. I actually have what's called an inversion stool where I can do a headstand where there's no pressure on my cervical vertebrae. It's a little stool about 12 inches in a U-shape, a padded U-shape. And manual affecting of the body, and that's what lymphatic type body work, whether it's a subtle Western lymphatic massage or more dynamic, or you can even get compression socks and things of these sorts. These are things that help move lymph. So lymph circulates through the entire body and then re-enters the general blood circulation here under the left clavicle. And if you touch yourself in this area, and those of you that are healers and body workers, if you touch your clients in these areas and it's extremely tender, this is a sign of inflammation and stagnation in the lymph system. The lymph that drains out of the head has to come through here too, and a lot of the persistent congestion that many people feel and sinus issues or the environment that really the pernicious viruses we've been dealing with the last few years, especially. If this is really clogged here, we're not going to get the drainage that we need. So this is where the lymph all comes back in and then pushes out with the arterial blood. This is a really good book in Chinese medicine. This really helped my thinking too, that we don't have a concept of blood stagnation in the Western physiologic perspective per se. We talk about clotting and cholesterol and things of this sort in the blood, but those are where you really have a pathological occurrence occurring. There's long-term stagnation that's occurring, and this is primarily in the lymph system. Again, the arterial blood of the body is being pushed, and there's movement through the arteries. If we get obstruction in the arteries, we really have a big problem. This usually has to be dealt with blood thinning, pharmaceuticals, stents are put in, these sorts of things. We have coagulation, the cause of heart attacks. This is really beyond just modest stagnation. This is really obstruction. But it's lymph stagnation. So this book puts through the theory that most aging and declining is not really because of the passage of time, but it's because the pervasive stagnation that occurs in blood. Because if you have stagnation in blood and stagnation in lymph, oxygen's not getting to the cells. And because the concept of inflammation is really a very hot topic now in media and in the conversation in the culture, inflammation is a result of blood stagnation because the inflammatory materials, the metabolic byproducts, are getting stuck. They're getting stuck in the tissues and they're becoming pervasive. And so this is a really important, and this book really gives a nice description and especially herbal strategies from Chinese medical point of view. So things essential to remember that the lymph system, not only is it carrying nutrition, it's also the sewage system of the body. Okay, and as the sewage system, we need to get these waste products away from the cells. That's an essential thing that we really have to consider. The immune response happens in lymph glands. It's not happening systemically systemically all over the body. It's targeted in lymph glands. And immune cells need to be able, I'm going to use the word see, but it's more like identify the pathogens, because then our immune system is able to dynamically adjust itself to fight the pathogen and destroy it. And it's absolutely essential for health and immunity to keep our lymph system as clean as possible. Now, I want to discuss a couple of concepts that are part of the Western, which dovetail into this, but I'm going to touch on huge topics briefly. And an important one is epigenetics. Epigenetics is a study how behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way our genes work. And unlike genetic changes, epigenetic changes are reversible. They don't alter the DNA sequence, but they can change how the body reads a DNA sequence. Now, in layman terms, we're saying that epigenetics, and it's a Western scientific thought now, that something like only 10 to maybe 30% of cancer is purely genetic. If the environment around the cell affecting the cell wall is toxic, this is when genes begin to change and modify, where cancerous growth begins. Okay, I want to be clear that you might have a genetic predisposition to cancer, but the cancer will not necessarily manifest unless a toxic condition around the cells exists. And a toxic condition around the cells exists because the lymph is stagnant. Okay, so the epigenetics idea, which is really monumental in many ways, confirms the whole Chinese idea of the essential nature that if blood cannot reach an area, that's where disease occurs. So if the lymph is stagnant and oxygen can't get there, this is where disease is going to occur. So as far as preventative and immune enhancing, we want to support the environment so that the DNA expresses in its most positive way, and the aberrant DNA doesn't have the chance to manifest. So again, the vast majority of cancer is not purely genetic. It's the environment in the body that becomes toxic. The second major area, and I'm bringing these up, so if it maybe sparks your interest, you'll do further research or viewing on your own, is something called lymphatics. And this is a quite recent discovery because it took functional MRIs to pick this up. It used to be a scientific dogma that the blood-brain barrier was absolute. It's not so. What we now know is something that's been called lymphatics. And it's recently discovered, and it's a waste clearance system in our brains and our central nervous system. And what happens, and this, to me, it's still mind-blowing, even though I've been looking into this for a couple of years now, that when we sleep, the shape of our brain changes and small rivulets form, small paravascular channels form in the brain, and these drain back into the lymph system. So our brain is so dynamic, it's burning disproportionate number of calories in our body. There's tremendous amount of waste product that forms in the brain. We see this because we know about dementia, we know about neurological problems. But how did the brain clear? The brain clears with good sleep, because these channels upon awakening change back, and they're gone. Now, what we see is one of the biggest geriatric problems that we face as we get older are sleep issues, and young people with sleep issues, especially people that are taking medications to sleep, are not really allowing their brains to clear. And this is a huge and developing problem. The statistics on cognitive and dementia issues and dementia are frightening. The government and the FDA and the drug companies are frantically looking for the drug that are going to clear plaques out of the brain. In my humble opinion, that is a false direction to take. The drug that was approved by the FDA was filled with controversy because the statistics didn't support its approval. Some commissioners of the FDA quit when that drug was even approved. It was pushed through. What we need to think about, a main thing to think about for enhancing brain health is sleep. Seems simple, but not just, but also I think sleep in darkened rooms and without screens and things of this sort of is really important. So sleep in the lymphatics promotes efficient elimination of metabolic byproducts from brain activity. And this sort of slide just reiterates what I've been on a roll been talking about. Upon awakening, these rivulets change. It filters toxins from the brain during sleep. I haven't seen a study if this occurs during deep meditation. I wouldn't be surprised that it does, but not many people are going to meditate solidly for 4, 6, 7, or 8 hours because it's in deep sleep over a period of time that the changes occur. We do know that meditation can help change the architecture and make good effect on the brain. I don't want to diminish meditation's extraordinary value physiologically, spiritually, and psychologically, but sleep is a critical issue, and hopefully sleep, duration of sleep, quality of sleep, and sleep that's achieved without pharmaceuticals. Okay, so that's our science. Let me take a sip of tea here. So we want to facilitate lymph circulation. Hopefully I've made a case where you recognize the value of this now. Okay, so lymphatic massage. Pretty much all massage is going to be beneficial, but specific lymphatic massage. And the particular characteristic of lymphatic massage, which will differentiate it from other marvelous and wonderful styles of massage, is that the direction of the effleurage or petrissage or tapotement is back to the heart. So you might do vigorous work back and forth, but you want to finish back towards the heart. Okay, there's many reasons a massage is invaluable. And bottom line of that is human touch is essential to our spiritual, emotional health and physical health. But this particular style that I was taught in Japan is very much lymphatic, and there is a broad lymphatic massage, Western tradition. It seems like lymphatic massage has a real foothold in cosmetic surgeries. After cosmetic surgeries, people are really willing to have the lymph of their face and neck worked on. Something called dry brushing, where you use in the shower, you use a dry brush, a vigorous dry brush, like a loofah is adequate, but they do sell dry brushes in health food stores. I'm sure Amazon has it. But again, this is not a back and forth technique. It's back to the heart. Deep abdominal massage. There's a huge accumulation of lymph in the abdominal region. This is a side note. Most of the serotonin in our body is produced in the gut. It's not produced in the brain. It's taken up in the brain. So deep abdominal massage is very beneficial for mood as well as lymphatics. It's not a somatic thing, but excellent nutrition. I don't want to ever leave it out, even if we're just talking primarily about somatic approaches. But it's feeding the body, so we can work it in there. Essential fatty acids, Americans got on this, maybe not just America, I'm most familiar, obvious, with America. We got on this crazy low fat. Well, it's physiologically, the lymph system is where fat is absorbed, and it's an essential part of our lymphatics. Carbohydrates and proteins have a different route of assimilation in the body than fats. Fats are absorbed directly into the lymphatics. On your left abdominal region, about an inch or two above your navel, there's something called the thoracic duct begins there, and the chyliocisterna. and that's where fats are absorbed. So essential fatty acids, the quality of the oils you use, maybe supplementation with krill oil or fish oils and these sort of things. These are really quite important. The structure of our brain is primarily fatty. So low fat, it's going to maybe keep your cholesterol down, not necessarily, but it's not going to be a healthy way of going. Trampoline bouncing, this was a very popular thing, especially in the 70s. It's good to come back. You can buy small trampolines. You can watch TV, you can watch the birds fly around, but just jumping up and down helps move lymph, and it can be fun. Of course, you can have small weights and make it more vigorous that way. External use of castor oil on the body, especially on the abdomen, oftentimes on the liver, the chylcisterna I mentioned on the abdomen. External castor oil, it's from the castor bean. It's very popularized by the Edgar Cayce readings, is dynamic for the lymph system and the immune system. Castor oil externally is anti-inflammatory without being immune suppressive. The pharmacological approach to anti-inflammatory action is immune suppressive. That's how cortisone and steroids work. They suppress white blood cell activity. Castor oil is anti-inflammatory, but immune enhancing. It can be used over lymph gland areas, it can be used over the thymus area, especially on the gut, very effective for liver. It's also anti-inflammatory. So if you have a disc inflammation in your spine, if you have hip inflammation in the sacroiliac, external castor oil. And all these things you can, if you're interested, you can Google and read more about it. Nasal passage irrigation, neti pots in the yogic tradition. Keeping your sinus passages clear, I think the importance of that never became more clear to me, not to be redundant in language there, with COVID. Because where did COVID proliferate in the body to get started? It was all in the nasal and sinus passages. There are ways to keep the sinuses open and to reduce stagnation there. So much of the Western diet contributes to phlegm accumulation and phlegm stagnation. And using saline, using there's xylitol in a nasal spray and a product called Xlear. This is really important. These are important sinus glands here. The sinus glands are important to keep clear, to prevent the ability for viral and bacterial infections to proliferate. And it's a very easy thing to do. There's some that you can just drip in. There's Arm & Hammer has a little pump one that you just press, and it has a little bit of, it's expelled just by movement of air. It's doesn't have any fluorocarbons or anything like that. And if you use the neti pot, if you're familiar with that technique. I've seen recently, there's sonic sinus tools that you use, which use sound waves to help break up stagnation here. I think it's called Sinusonic is the product I've noticed. And the techniques of cupping and gua sha, which I'll get into discussing a little bit more. Okay. Further clinical strategies, and these aren't so much that you can do on your own again, but are helpful. Certainly acupuncture moxibustion, which is warming of points, it's a thermal technique. Herbal remedies, east and west, help with immune enhancement. Some of the earliest research done on acupuncture indicated that the stimulation of the point at the elbow, LI11, increased white blood cell counts and circulation in the body. This was research back in the 70s. It's an immune enhancing technique. It can be done with pressure, it can be done with needles, it could be done with magnets. There are a variety of things. A lot of people use cold or alternating cold and hot showers. They're braver than me to use cold showers, but people swear by it. It's very invigorating. It'll beat a cup of coffee, they say. But I think it's worth noting that is a good technique people do. Sweating, exercise, I've already mentioned, the movement of smooth muscle helps move lymph in the body. Sweating, we eliminate more toxins through sweat than any other way. And a lot of people don't sweat much. And where they do sweat, they use antiperspirants in the armpit. Antiperspirants, especially that have aluminum, are extremely, I'm going to use the word dangerous. The vast majority of breast cancers are in the superior lateral quadrant of the breast, right in the area of the lymph glands in the armpit area. Sweating is really important. And if you want to use an infrared sauna or just exercise and dress too warm, I think it's quite important to sweat as much as you can. I already mentioned inverting the body and gravitational field. There are zero gravity chairs you can use. They're comfortable to read in. They're comfortable to watch TV in. A good technique is to lie with on your back with your butt up against a wall and bring your legs up and just rest them. This is a very good jet lag thing to do when you get off a plane back to home or in a hotel, to get your blood and lymph flowing out of your legs. And again, deep breathing, diaphragmatic action. So these are some general things you could do. Now, gua sha is something we can do for ourselves. There are parts of the body we need someone to help us with. I was exposed to or taught gua sha back in my teacher in 1977. It was life-changing. It was something I'd never experienced and never come across. Because I've taught it now for almost 40 years around the world. It's always an eye-opening thing. Gua sha's become well known now, again, in the cosmetic realm, because a lot of people, I'm going to say mostly women, if that's okay, are doing gua sha as part of their facial treatment at night to help move blood and lymph and invigorate the tissue. Gua sha is ancient. If we think Chinese Metta is ancient because it goes back 3,000 years, and Ayurvedic maybe because it goes back 4,000 or 5,000 years, gua sha, I think, is caveman, cave woman, cave person technique, because you use either a smooth stone you pull out of the creek, or you use a smooth edge of a stick, and you literally scrape. You just scrape. And what this does is it helps move stagnation, and it addresses the blood stagnation, improves circulation. In this picture, you can see these are the petechiae that form when gua sha is done, these red raised area. Gua sha, in the Chinese expression, gua means to scrape, and sha actually literally translates as the skin of a shark. Now, I don't think most of us have pet a shark before, but the shark skin is a little gravelly. And this petechiae that you see on the screen, especially the lower picture, when you touch the skin after a gua sha, there's a little bumpy. It's a little bumpy areas that feel like a shark skin, apparently. And so what I think a more functional definition is we scrape to relieve blood and lymph stagnation. The places where we know we have myofascial tenderness, they're always tender, or maybe your headaches grow out of your shoulders and back. They're usually, if you do gua sha in those areas, the color will change on the skin. It can be moderate to deeper pressure. I tend to use a fairly heavy pressure, or what the recipient is comfortable with. It's a clinical technique that I do a lot of. I think it's a technique that we could do at home. Interestingly, I know when I first arrived in San Diego at the beginning of 1979 and was teaching and demonstrating gua sha, I had people tell me that parents, San Diego was one of the places where boat people came after the Vietnam War. So there was a strong Indo-Chinese community here starting in the early 70s. And this technique is used throughout Asia and in the Middle East. That children would come to school with these petechiae marks on their neck and shoulder, and the parents were being hauled in for abusing their children. And ultimately, they did in-service and told the teachers that this was not children being abused. It was actually being a traditional cultural medical technique, a medical technique from the home. And what's true is this is always used in first stages of colds and flus. Why? Because it invigorates the blood and lymph. It creates an immune response so the body can naturally fight an infection. Now, we're still recommending antibiotics for viral infections, which to me is somewhat abusive, where gua sha is a very natural technique. You don't need a license to do it. From the time my kids could hold a gua sha tool and I couldn't reach my back, they might have been 8 or 9 years old, I'd have them gua sha me. When you have gua sha, especially the first times, and when I first had my teacher do it in 1977, the color of what came out of me, which appeared on the skin, was somewhere between purple and black. I had such bad blood stagnation, and I knew I had a lot of inflammation and pain because I was in constant pain I've been doing a lot of physical labor at that time in my life. I wasn't a dilettante yet. And it was shocking. But I went from not being able to rotate my neck more than like 15 degrees to having a full rotation, literally within a 10-minute treatment. It was profound. And I became a gua sha devotee and have had the opportunity to share this technique over the years, not just here, but around the world when I've traveled and taught. So gua sha is very simple. It doesn't require anything but a smooth edge tool. I've been in situations where I've used the handles of butter knives. You can use it's called coining in a lot of cultural expressions. It's easy to do. Now cupping and gua sha are like cousins, but cupping involves a little more requirement of technique or tools. And cupping is where we create a suction on the skin to relieve blood and chi or energy stagnation. Okay. Now, traditionally, cups, if you look at this picture, there's different ways cupping can be done. The earliest cupping from archaeologic studies was hollowed out horns were used, and you had to have the controlled use of fire at that point. So it's a little bit later in history. Again, gua sha, I think, goes back to the caves. Cupping required the controlled use of fire, where we create a vacuum in a jar and then place it on the skin and a suction occurs. So there's temporarily like a controlled stagnation. And what's happening under that cup is a lot of dynamic physiologic activity is occurring. And when the cup comes off, you might see the kind of marks that you see in the diagram here. So that's the controlled use of fire. Now, in contemporary times now, we use suction pumps. And there's silicone cups that you could see in the bottom diagram there. And these are very good for home use. And you're not dealing with fire, you don't have the risk of fire. Some of the suction cups that are done with a pump, there's actually a magnet in there. Now, why would you put a magnet in a cup? Because iron is attracted to the magnet. And where's iron? Iron's in the hemoglobin of the red blood cells, the heme. The heme is iron. And it's the red blood cells and the iron that carries oxygen. So when you put a magnet on the skin or a magnet in a cup, you're creating the dynamics of the cupping. And you also have the ability of bringing more oxygen to the area. And fundamentally, oxygen is the great anti-inflammatory substance that's happening in our body. It's what helps relieve inflammation. So cupping's used now for scar tissue and adhesions. You put it right over painful trigger points and you'll get some discoloration. Improves blood and lymph circulation, reduces pain and inflammation, promotes mobility and allows increased range of motion, and releases trapped toxins the same way gua sha does, old trapped toxins. There's been studies about cupping, and in review of literature in the Western scientific community, they've determined from a scientific physiological point of view, it promotes the skin's blood flow, changes the skin's biomechanical properties, increases pain thresholds, improves local anaerobic metabolism and relieves stagnation, reduces inflammation, and boosts cellular immunity. So just these reasons alone from the literature, I think, without getting into any East Asian medical model ideas, cupping is extremely valuable. So again, here's these different types of cupping. You see the hand pump, you see the flames, and you see the silicone. The silicone are nice because you can put them in your suitcase if you travel, and you can put things on top of them. They don't crack, they don't break. You know, glass cups, if a glass cup falls off and hits the floor, it'll shatter. But these other techniques and materials are really, really helpful. Now, we had a great ambassador for cupping, and that was the great swimmer Michael Phelps in the Olympics. You put this gorgeous man in a Speedo and you show his cup marks, and in interviews, the cup marks were apparent. And all of a sudden, cupping went mainstream and people wanted to know about it. It became very common. You saw people in the massage community, all of a sudden their business cards were going cupping therapy. It was wonderful to see. And we thank Michael Phelps for that. So in conclusion, blood and lymph stagnation are the root cause of many diseases. Reducing blood and lymph stagnation is essential and important for immunity and health and vitality and longevity. And we have a variety of ways, including self-healing, family healing, professionals, to facilitate this healing process. And it's a process. You're not going to necessarily cure, but you're going to prevent, and you're going to help with recovery. Boom. So any questions that you might have? Anne-Marie's going to answer me a couple of things. If anybody listening has a question, I can be reached by email. And a website that's very dear to me is my music. And I haven't even gotten into the use of sound for lymph and healing and vibration, but it's a really important area for another time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gold. That was really inspiring and informational, and I feel like I learned a lot just from listening to you for this short amount of time. And there's so many practical applications that you can start to apply right now in your life to get the blood moving, if you will, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Well, I know Anne-Marie has a host of questions for you, but for those of you in our audience or watching the recording, I just wanted to remind you that these presentations are made possible by your donations. So you can text 801-801, you can text, CIHS to 801-801, and I will also pop a direct link in our chat box. So Anne-Marie is going to go with some questioning. It looks like Thomas has his hand up. He might have a question as well. And then if anybody of you in the audience has a question, we will have time for that following. So yeah, jump right in, Thomas and Anne-Marie.
Thomas, please begin.
Okay. Thanks so much, Rick. It was really wonderful.
Thank you.
And listening to this, the question came up to me. Shin Lin has a model, his idea of what chi energy is, from something the Yellow Emperor said, blood is the mother of chi. Shin Lin thinks chi energy is basically blood flow. I wonder what you think about that idea, or kind of the additional idea that there's something more involved in chi, like a non-physical aspect that interacts with the physical as well.
Yeah, we say that chi is the mother of blood, and the blood is directed by chi too. So blood, I think, is a physical manifestation of chi and its movement. Because when chi stops moving is when death ensues. And so I think your point is well taken. And I agree with that analysis. Yeah. We say the sun is the source of all chi, and it's definitely the source of life on earth too. And so, yeah, I think that blood is the physical manifestation of chi.
Okay, yeah, and Shin-Lin thinks specifically blood flow, which I
Yes.
think is along the lines of
Yeah,
what you're
because if
saying.
blood's not flowing, and then we don't have life.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's the chi that propels it.
okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, Anne Marie, I'll let you go with that.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. This is, to me, this is the subject of all subjects. I do agree that lymph is almost, the primary source of life on so many levels. And I was really delighted to see, and I, for somebody who's been advocating for different systems of medicine to be more within our system of, let's say, fiscal concerns, such as, let's say, having, acupuncture needles and acupuncture coming into our system so that we can also have acupuncture be part of, people's healthcare programs, and that they're able to include it into their insurance aspects. I was wondering, as somebody who goes to let's say, an orthopedic, because I've broken feet and various different limbs. And when I tell them I use, acupuncture and cupping and gua sha, and also the various different modalities, which I consider preventative or either enhancement, um, uh, do you feel that the protocols within our system, within, let's say, just the allopathic system in the United States, are listening to people such as yourself in preventative medicine or Chinese traditional medicine?
Compared to the 70s, absolutely. I think it's still sort of spotty. The strides that have been made are astounding to me in a way, although it's also frustrating still. When I first was practicing in the late 70s, early 80s, we were practicing alternative medicine. That slowly evolved into complementary medicine. The buzzword now is integrative medicine. And forward-thinking med schools are having departments of integrative medicine. There are individual doctors that are practicing with integrative medicine. Oftentimes there's a strict hierarchy still, where Western medicine, definitely is the king of the jungle. And as far as treatment of a lot of disease, especially traumatic disease or traumatic injury, Western medicine is the top dog, I think. But if we ever embrace preventative medicine in the Western world, these integrative approaches, the holistic or noetic approaches, body, mind, spirit, are essential. I mean, we have to have healing environments that from the moment a patient or a person, and you're not always a patient, you're really a person, enters a healing environment, that the environment, the smells, the color, the sounds are all supportive of the healing process. Let's empower individuals. I was pulling my hair, whatever hair I have, during COVID, because there was never a message from authoritative voices about prevention. You might have a news article about COVID brought to you by something with high fructose corn syrup in it, or just fast foods, or just, unless we take some personal responsibility, and this idea of inflammation, and especially phlegm in the body, have to be recognized. Fake sugars, sugars could, sugars doesn't have to be, some sugars are actually helpful in the body. The brain needs carbohydrates to function. But I don't want to go too far off on this, but I think your point, there's definitely been progress. There's more and more changes. I know at our acupuncture college here in San Diego that interns from UCSD Med School interact with our clinical interns. We have outpatient treatment in senior centers, military, homeless, where MD students and acupuncture, Chinese medicine interns are working together. We have a Bastyr naturopathic school in San Diego. There's a community that's forming there. The insurance, I mean, it's spotty, but some insurance is covering more and more. The insurance companies, I think, take advantage of acupuncture practitioners as far as compensation and paperwork that's required. But the foot's in the door. From my life experience, we're living past where I ever dreamed we would be now. I never really thought of this as a profession when I first got into it. Really, then 45 years later, it's still what I love doing. But there's a lot of work to do, as you well know, Anne Marie.
Oh, yeah. I do indeed. I did love your book because I felt that it was a personal story of somebody who's gone through, their various different studies, certainly in Asia, and then, eventually to the States. And you, of course, use even examples of what's going on with areas that are quite sensitive, certainly in the allopathic world, regarding cancer. And so is there anything that you might want to talk about that? Or is that something that, you sort of limit?
That's perceptive of you, dear. Kiyoshi Kato, my sensei, he was running treatment centers for terminally ill cancer patients, and he was making some brash claims based on empirical evidence that he was bringing people that were on the door of death back to life and were living happy and productive lives. Yeah. He wrote about this. He interviewed about this. He wrote a little treatise that I had that was translated by my friend Kauko and is included in this book. When I came back to America and I really worked on this material to understand it more rather than just having learned the technique, I recognized two things. One is I wasn't going to fight the establishment and say I was treating cancer. I never went there. And even still, I would say you're always just treating a person who has cancer, who has cancer. But that's a linguistic thing, and I didn't want to get into that. When I went deeper into understanding, I recognized that the core of the work was to support the lymphatics and the immunity. And if that is what created, for Kiyoshi Kato, well, all of a sudden you had new blood cells, you had new stem cells, and you were able to rebuild the body that way. So he wasn't so much fighting the cancer as rebuilding the body. And I felt that was the thrust of my book, was to let's rebuild the body and let's support the immunity and get rid of inflammation. I included his treatise because I find it fascinating and I hear his voice telling those things. But if you noticed, I have a disclaimer at the beginning of that in big letters that this is there for discussion purposes. I don't know exactly the words I used. This is for discussion. I'm not endorsing nor criticizing this. I just think it's important to recognize what's being said. Now, Kiyoshi Kato, he was doing all this, and Chizuma too, before we knew about epigenetics. And I've always felt that preventing cancer is a more wise strategy than just trying to treat cancer. And as we know that cancer treatment is a multi-billion-dollar industry, there's a lot of interest in it as a business model. You see major cancer centers being built. You don't see rejuvenation centers being built. A lot of what we're talking about is still limited to the spas. It's not really so totally mainstream. We know people that have cancer when they come out, they've not changed their diet, they haven't done psychotherapy necessarily. I didn't really mention that at all, but one thing Kiyoshi Kato did, which was very extraordinary, especially in Japan, is he brought all of the new people together, and most everybody was there with a significant other. And it became like an Esalen-style group therapy, where he got people talking about themselves and their disease in a group environment. This is extraordinary in Japan because I was told by people in the center. I was always being told through interpreters. I don't speak Japanese. The Kauko spoke perfect English and Japanese. That people would go in for surgery with not knowing that they were having a tumor return, that they weren't even being told directly about themselves in that environment. Now here's Kiyoshi Kato in a not just one-on-one, but a group environment, and he would single people out in the circle. And I remember one time he scolded a husband because his wife had mastectomies. And he says, your wife still needs to be touched. Your wife still needs to be loved, physically loved and emotionally loved. And they started to cry in front of a group. It was most extraordinary. And I think this was an important part of the healing. And, you know, we here at CIHS, I mean, we're teaching noetics, we're teaching integrative holistics. That's not happening in medical schools. I mean, there's still, you know, doctors not as a rule, but the vast majority of them sit behind a desk, never touch their patients. Don't really, they're looking for the ism or the itis, not the whole being. And there's, for us, Anne Marie, you know, we've been in this for a long time. The next generation, we need them to come along and pick up the banner, and they are. I mean, I see the demographics of people studying Chinese medicine, naturopathy. It's, young people know, there's certainly a cohort of young people that know, and they're pursuing it. And that's important and a blessing and essential.
But, you know, yeah, I agree with you. It's also that the medical community, certainly within, let's say, the Western medicine, was so driven by, let's say, the cosmetic industry or any type of anti-aging related to cosmetic aspects, which you even talk about, you know, the lymphatic system, that it can be good. And there are many lymphatic massage therapists that work that out for people of cosmetic aspects. And then it moved into people looking at it more on a preventative value system. And this is what I've seen in a shift that you're bringing together now. It's not just Chinese medicine, it's not just Ayurvedic, but it's all the systems coming together and truly being integrated. Even just using the word integrative is so important. But I do think, I mean, for somebody who is also involved very much in the sound movement, maybe give a little bit of a teaser before I leave it to other people to question you, to just talk about how sound, and then I think we should do actually another wonderful webinar with you on sound and its impact on the lymphatic system or just on preventive medicine.
Well, sure. As you know, I'll share that starting 13 years ago, I began working with Yuval Ron to create beautiful music, not just sound, but beautiful music to facilitate meditative consciousness and healing. And this is the Metta Mindfulness music.com company. Sound, we see, again, functional MRIs really took something that was just empirical, because sound has been used for healing by all cultures throughout history, all the way back to sitting around a fire and doing percussive. You know, it made a difference for people, so they did it. Now we know that the architecture of the brain can be changing, the physiology of the brain could be changing, and the dynamic activity of neurons could be changing during sound. In the body, sonic treatments can be used, not just, certainly not music, but sonic vibrations. And light therapy also help stimulate physiologic activity in the body and get the blood and lymph flowing. We see infrared lights in like bicycle helmets being used to affect the brain function. You see infrared on the body. I personally use something that's called a biomat, which is a far infrared pad. So here's infrared on the light spectrum. Here's far infrared. It's the most distant, and both of them have therapeutic value. The far infrared actually heats the body from the inside out. It's quite remarkable. And what's its goal? Its goal is to increase lymphatic movement and change. So sound can be very purposeful, very beneficial, and if it's used in a good way. Now, what Yuval and I have been trying to do, and we've been working now in some integrative medical programs, is to make a healing technique universally available. Because right now, if you're using far infrared or some of these sonic tables and stuff, you're still going to a medical facility. You're still going to a doctor's office or a spa situation, which is great. But there, there's billions of people. We all need this. And sound can be ubiquitous. It can be beneficial and be purposeful in all sorts of environments. And with that in mind, there's a lot of sound pollution.
Mhm.
I'm so many restaurants I go to, I don't go out to eat that much, but why do they have to play the music they play? Now, I asked a manager once at a restaurant at the Broad Museum in L.A., why are you playing this music? It's so unconducive to a calm meal. He said, we're trying to turn the tables, sir.
Ah,
They're
yeah.
playing fast music so people eat faster. It was like,
Yeah, noise pollution. Yeah.
so yeah, so what I think that the sound healing is probably one of the oldest. It probably, along with early use of herbs and plants and berries, in the environment. It's on the cutting edge now of neuroscience, because now we can see what's happening to the brain. The actual measurement of brain waves really just dates from the 70s. And that's picking up just the superficial brain waves. There's something deep happening in the brain we can't even get at, like in the basal ganglion or the microtubules that are in the brain that are vibrating at levels we can't even imagine. We can imagine them, but we're not able to measure them yet. And every cell has frequency. Every organ has frequency. There's visionaries who feel that if you measure a body and capture the frequencies of each of the organs when they're healthy, and you have that a record, and there's a problem, and you remeasure, and you see a disruption in the resonance of an organ and the vibration, the frequency, that you feed frequency into the body to help correct the physiologic functioning, because there's a vibration happening at all level, at the cellular level. There's spinning energy of electrons around the nucleus. I mean, everything is moving, everything is dynamic, because of that, there's frequencies being created. The more we look into this and more we study it, by the time we're sick and we have a physiologic change or we have symptoms that we're dealing with, a lot of time and change has gone on a subtle energy and a frequency level. And if we start looking for that, we're going to find data points that we can begin to affect. Now, with the brain, we call it brain entrainment, where if you want to put a brain to create neural pathways, because neurons in the brain can't regenerate, but new neural pathways can develop. This is really an important part of cognitive treatment with sound. That if you put a periodic beat of the brain state that you want into the brain will begin to cycle at that frequency. So if someone can't meditate or can't into deep sleep, and you decide you want to bring delta waves to the brain, you can do that. And you can actually change, and it's a measurable phenomena. And that's some of what we're doing in our work with brain entrainment. So there's the future of medicine, I think, is very exciting. And I think the more we integrate traditional treatment and sound, for instance, we're going to make a difference, so that on the end where you need specialists and hospitals and surgeries, hopefully you're going to start to see a decrease in the necessity for that, because people are going to live older, healthier lives, and then hopefully just decide peacefully to let go.
Amen.
That's the short answer there.
Well, I will certainly leave on that point, because I do want to have other people have an opportunity to say, but I agree with you that the ancient traditions and medicine combining with our wonderful ability to be able to see what's happening in our bodies, with the various MRIs and whatever, and measurables as such, is the most exciting time.
Yep.
And so this is the time to certainly focus on, getting our bodies together and healing. And that's why I love CIHS, because it does focus on the mind, body, spirit, which is everything that's right in this amazing book that I loved, as though it were, a wonderful, fictional story, but it was actually a true story. So, of a pioneer. And so thank you very much, Rick. And let's open it up to other people.
Thank you, Emery.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you
you.
guys both for that lively discussion. I think you touched on so many good points. So if there's anybody in the audience that has a question, you can raise your hand and speak your question, or you can type it into the Q&A box. While we're waiting to see if there's any questions, I actually had a question, Dr. Gold. When you were talking about the gua sha tool, I immediately looked that up, because you said you had your children do it, and I was like, I could have my kids do that. So if for somebody who is just starting with a tool, say I just get it in the mail tomorrow, what do you suggest? What's the way to get started with doing it?
A smooth edge lid from a almond butter or peanut butter.
Oh,
It could be, again, they use smooth rocks from a stream, coins.
yeah.
It has to be something that fits in the hand comfortably, I think, especially for little ones, like smaller lids, but really just you check the edge of the lid or the tool so there's no sharp edges.
Yeah.
You lubricate the skin,
Uh-huh.
the massage oil or a cream, and you just literally scrape. And it's not, when I scrape, I do different angles and then finish back to the heart.
Back to the heart, right.
But when you're scraping, you can do this way, up and down. And really, again, you go on Amazon now, there are all sorts of cool tools. There's polished wood and there's jade and
Yeah.
but it's again, it's ancient around the fire, I don't know if Neanderthals could do it because they were maybe a little hairy. Even if you're very hairy, you just oil more. You don't see on dark skin, you don't see the color change quite as much, but it happens.
Yeah.
But us pale faces, the skin color change is dynamic. There's a couple of good books that about it with the history and sort of weaving the Western and Eastern. A colleague of mine, Arya Nielsen, wrote a wonderful book called Gua Sha. It's available on Amazon. But yeah, it's don't make it complicated. And the contraindications, you don't go over skin flaps, you don't go over eczema or psoriasis.
Okay.
If someone's on blood thinning medications, you don't do it. You don't do it. It's not recommended on the low back of a pregnant woman. I'm not recommending it, but with experience of a pregnant woman who's having severe lumbosacral pain, I've done light gua sha with never any complications. But I'm not recommending it to the general public in that way.
Yeah.
But you don't make it complicated. It's really just, and it's so, people who've had this persistent, most of us know that when we're tired, where we hurt. And
Yes.
if you gua sha that area, be ready for a light show, because the color is going to change. And if you just do not even that deep, you're going to see the skin will get red. But then, and what's interesting is when the color changes, the recipient usually will have an aha moment because of the release occurs.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, that is definitely something that I am going to take home and probably even practice tonight. I have some rocks from the beach that are smooth and polished. I know.
Just make sure it's comfortable in your hand.
Yeah.
You don't want to.
Yeah. Well, great. Oh, thank you so much. All of this information was so practical and items that we can start incorporating into our lives today for better health and vitality, and yes, incorporating our mind, our body, and our spirit together. So I really thank you, Dr. Gold, for being here. And I thank you, Anne-Marie, for joining us and for your great questions. And I thank you all in the audience. If you're new to our community, welcome. We are very happy that you are here. We are growing, and you can follow us on our social media at CIHS, or you can join our newsletter by going to our website. And we look forward to sharing more webinars and health and wellness and mind, body, spirit pursuits with you all. So thank you again. This recording will be available in a few days, and we look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you, Dr. Gold.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thanks, Anne Marie. Thanks, Thomas. Oh, Thomas.
Yes, and
Okay.
thank you very much. And by the way, the photos in the books give a great description. So Nicole, if you haven't looked at the book yet, please do. And it
Yes.
shows how to do your gua sha technique.
Oh, great. Actually,
Yeah.
yes. There you go.
I'll walk you through it.
Yes.
Chapter
Perfect.
5.
Perfect.
Chapter 5.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
you all.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay, Bye.
Mhm.